what I think is the most important thing. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. They can think what they want. If I'm dead, then they don't exist anymore, neither do I, neither does the universe.
You went down the PhD route at least a little later than most. Why this topic?
Why is that only possible that we somehow have to say, no, the best we can hope for is that there's a majority of people that want to live this way, and damn the rest of them. I don't know, it's just, I hate that idea. Quarter-life crisis lasted half a decade. So I'm in crisis from, like all the way through to 2013, whatever that is, 2008 to 2013, I'm in crisis. I had the privilege of being broken out of prison. I didn't break myself out of that prison. So I don't have any advice for people who feel stuck, because I was, and for 5 years I couldn't do anything. Fuck the future, man. You don't have no control over it. Like just, have a vague concept of something you want to do, but just put yourself heart and soul into whatever is happening right now. That's all you can control.
Nick, I start all my podcasts with the exact same question. And that question I ask because usually it establishes how the rest of the conversation continues. That question is, are you happy?
Can I give one of those really stupid, nuanced answers?
Of course.
I don't actually like to be happy because I feel like happy is kind of like an accentuated sort of chemical state of mind. I prefer to say that I'm content. That would be my ideal. So am I content now? Yes, absolutely. Am I happy? No, because I'm not doing something that might make me happy. If you go and run around and do some good exercise and then there's endorphins, then I'm happy. So
okay.
But I'm content.
Yeah.
So I feel good about my life.
That, I guess, answers my next question, because the next question would be, do you think happiness is what we should chase in life?
Again, I think it depends on whether you accept the way that I've distinguished between happiness and contentment, right? I genuinely just think happiness is like a spontaneous emotion that sort of erupts from you. Like something happens, someone comes that you haven't seen for a while. Oh, I'm happy to see you. Or you get a gift. Oh, that makes me happy. Whereas I think the ideal, if at least from my point of view, is to be devoid of stresses or worries. So content, meaning a state where I'm no longer neurotic about things I don't have or desperately chasing something that I want that I don't have. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think for me, I guess that is me being happy, is that I'm content. And I do definitely think that's something that everyone should aspire to. I think you should look to try to have a life where you are satisfied with what you have and where you're motivated by whatever it is that you're doing in pursuit of, more fulfillment.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating because obviously I ask, especially this question in particular, to everyone. And equally, I just asked your wife. And she said, no, because she believes happiness in particular it comes and goes. Mm-hmm. It fades. Mm-hmm. It's not consistent in that sense. Mm-hmm. So I always find it interesting how the same question can be very different depending on the person. Equally to happiness, I asked the question, or I'm using this podcast as a research tool. And in particular, because I want to answer a research hypothesis. And that hypothesis is that passion equals purpose. Mm-hmm. What's your opinion on that?
I like the equation. I think it's very difficult to be able to have a purpose for something if you're not passionate about it. I sort of think that's a bit sort of artificial. So I think, first and foremost, just in general, what's the point of doing anything that you're not passionate about? You're either then just working for somebody else or fulfilling some expectation. So yeah, I think absolutely. Purpose, if that is to mean that your life has meaning, has to be conjoined with passion, which is that you yourself think it's important and meaningful. So yeah, for sure.
Is there anything in particular that you are inherently passionate about?
Yep, ideas for sure, definitely. Just the idea of ideas. Just exploring where they came from, how they are constituted, why people have those ideas, why they don't have other ideas. So ideas it doesn't really matter. It can be philosophy or, a set of principles or whatever from anyone, all sorts of different, but that definitely I'm passionate about. I'm also passionate about, my relationship with Julia, my wife, aspiring towards a happy family. So passionate about the prospect of having a family. Like by that, I mean children. And I guess passionate about pursuing the idea that I can contribute something meaningful in my life. So like leave something behind that actually counts for something.
Right. How are you currently trying to achieve those passions?
I'll start with the last one first. It's probably the easiest. I'm trying to get myself properly educated so that I can then start my career as an academic writer, and then hopefully from there I can manage to write something that someone would care about. And yeah, so that's that part. With the family thing, I guess it's just, I mean, I'm only relatively recently married, and so there's a lot to learn about being married, like how it is that you're meant to be good to your partner and be a good husband and all that sort of stuff. That's a learning process. We took marriage classes, which were in advance. So in the Catholic Church, before you're able to be certified to be married, you have to do like marriage lessons where they teach you about the sacrament. And that was super helpful because it was basically like a whole lot of, I guess you could say, it was basically, it was so much was very similar to what you would get in a secular marriage class. Like how do you deal with issues that emerge? How do you talk to one another in a healthy way? All that sort of stuff. So I think it's just a learning process, and it's, I think it's also just making time, not being too selfish. I think that's definitely super important, obviously, if you're trying to make a good relationship with someone else. And what was the first one I said? What was I initially? What was the other thing I was passionate
about? Ideas.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I read every day, so I think it's just part and parcel. I think the one thing I would say is I don't read enough ideas that I'm immediately drawn to, because I'm still finishing off, like a dissertation. So I'm just reading the same stuff, whereas like, I mean, I don't know, just a moment ago, I bought the first book like that I have bought for something that I personally was interested in reading in years, because everything else has just been going down that path. So I look forward to that.
Nice. You already touched upon your PhD, and I will most definitely dig into that first, more later. But first, if I understood correctly, you only relatively recently, what is recently, like 3 years ago, I believe, started on your PhD. But now you are how old?
40.
40. So you went down the PhD route at least a little later than most. A lot do it consistently behind. What was the deciding factor that you decided, now I'm going to do my PhD?
So I only decided to do the PhD, I think, when I was towards the end of the bachelor. And then I realized I really like academic work. I like what's required and what the actual practice of the work is, right? So, I mean, that's obviously one issue. Like if you say, I want to go to university, I want to be a doctor, but do you really know what being a doctor is? You might have this exterior perception, the same with a lawyer or whatever. Every profession, every vocation has actually an intrinsic sort of repeated practice that's really difficult unless you give it a go to know whether that's something that you'd be good at and something you'd enjoy. So it wasn't until I actually was at university doing, sort of para being an academic, that I was like, I really like this. I love just reading copious amounts of material, extracting from that, the key sort of points, then synthesizing that into some original concept, and then trying to then, articulate that in a condensed form. So I found out I really liked it, and I was like, well, okay, why would I ever want to leave a university setting or this setting where I'm immersed in this thing that I'm passionate about, which is ideas? So that was the zero. So that the idea to do the PhD came from being at uni there. But the reason that I went to uni in the first place was literally because I was, I realized much earlier on that the job that I had been in for half a decade, prior to being in university, I was a real estate agent, did that for 10 years. And halfway through that 10 years, so 5 years into being a real estate agent, I absolutely hated it. But it was impossible to get out of the situation. I was trapped because I was responsible for someone else, was making a certain amount of money, had possessions around me which demanded an income to support those possessions and the person. So I was basically like a prisoner to the capacity to make the money now to support the structure of the life that had built around having started to make money.
Yep.
But like, I remember being like, it was at least every fortnight on my day off, I'd get up and I would just start raging. I'd just be like, I hate my life. It's so completely pointless. I do nothing, all these stupid people around me and, customers. I mean, it's not particularly polite, to be honest with you, but, that's just the way it is. If you're in a sales job, you hate the customers. I hated the people you deal with. I hated the way they spoke to me. I hated the way that I was perceived as a real estate agent. So it was fine to make money as a young person. Like when I was in my early 20s, it's great to have a lot of cash and be able to go to whatever restaurant you want and go on skiing trips and all that stuff. But it just didn't do anything for me. And, and basically, and again, this is my opinion of real estate. There's a lot of people that find that a completely meaningful occupation. I personally don't think that there's much about real estate except like doing deals and making money. And if you aren't satisfied by just doing a deal and making cash, there's not a lot in that job.
Just to go back, I guess, even further, what then led you down the real estate path to begin with? When you first sort of ended up as a real estate agent, did you think this is what I want to do? Or?
So look, basically, I didn't leave myself many good options at school because I was much more interested in hanging out with friends and smoking weed. And so I ended up leaving, and I bounced around between different high schools because my parents were separated. And so I finished the last year of high school at 3 different schools. So the grade that I got at the end of high school was just a complete disaster. So it actually wasn't even good enough to go to university. So even if I wanted to, I couldn't. So I was like, okay, great. So now I've gone through all this. What the hell am I going to do with my life? And so I went into retail, just selling clothes, which is, I think, what I guess lots of people do. And then I remember one day, a couple of real estate agents came in and asked me to, help them out with suits. And I sold them some suits and they were like, hey, dude, you're not actually that bad at selling. Have you thought about real estate? You can make a hell of a lot more money than doing this. And I was like, oh, I never thought about that. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
And then so I went and I went to get a real estate license. So I studied full time for a year at a technical college to get that, and then worked in a bar as a glassy, from like 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. worked in a bar and then did study during the week. And then after a year got the diploma and then went into real estate and then did that for 10 years.
So then you go indeed into real estate, and then fast forward 5 years, you're starting to hate your job. Then you decided to get a bachelor?
No. So 5 years I hate my job, and then I'm stuck for another 5 years.
Right.
So the only reason that I was able to make the transition from an occupation that I hated was that the woman that I was supporting and the life I was supporting blew up, just completely exploded. So I didn't have a wife anymore and had no possessions and had no place and was just completely free. And so all of that happened when I was in New York. So my partner then and I had made the decision to go and move to New York. So the intention was that I would do real estate in America. So I got the New York real estate license. We moved to Manhattan, got a place, and then the relationship just was like, and so then I decided, well, this has all just been such a disaster. I feel way too self-conscious, I think, to like go back to Sydney and sort of be like, yeah, this plan for me to be this super like famous, New York real estate agent. Yeah, that didn't quite work out. So I'm back here again. So I was like, no, I'm not going to move backwards. I just move forward again. And then I went to Munich, which is where my mother suggested I go because we had a family friend who could put me up. So I literally just said, okay, I'm just going to take a year and I'm just going to live. And so then that gap year, which was when I was 31 years old, was in Munich, and I was a tour guide. So I was a bicycle tour guide for 12 months and just really enjoyed Munich in the summertime. And then it wasn't that long before I met Julia, and then we started seeing each other. And then after 3 months, I started thinking, now, what are we going to do? What's going to be of this situation? And so I put the proposal to Julia. I think I want to go to university for the first time and study something that interests me. I can't do that here in Germany because of the language barrier. And, I wouldn't have gotten the free education, or maybe I would have, I'm not sure. But anyway, and so I said, would you come to Australia? And she agreed. And she said, yeah, I'll come to Australia where you study. So then this was 2014 that we're having this discussion. So for 2015, we head back to Australia and I do my bachelor, master's, and then in 2018, we're like, what are we going to do now? And then Julia was basically like, look, I've had enough of Australia. I've given it a shot. It's not amazing for me. Can we move somewhere else? Can we go to Canada, America, or England? And so then I looked around and then got accepted to a university here. So we're like, boom, let's go. And we moved in 2019 here and doing the PhD.
Normally I keep this question for a little bit later, but I'm going to move it to the front. Would you have considered this part where sort of you end up divorcing, I guess, your wife, and would you have called that a quarter life crisis?
Oh yeah, I mean, for sure, right? I mean, I think what's funny is quarter life crisis that almost marries up exactly when I first tried to wriggle out of being a real estate agent, right?
Right.
So my quarter life crisis had lasted half a decade. So I'm in crisis from, like all the way through to 2013, whatever that is, 2008 to 2013, I'm in crisis.
Yeah.
Just hating everything about it. So yeah, I think definitely it was. I sort of walked down that path and the real estate thing was fine, but I guess at that, I don't know. Yeah, I suppose what is a quarter life crisis? I guess at a certain point in your life, you're sort of reflecting on where you've come so far and you kind of look backwards and then you look forwards and you go, there's a lot of my life left. I don't want to go too much further down this path before it becomes like, fixed.
Yeah.
Like maybe it's a time to make a change.
Yeah.
And I think
that's something I'm trying, that's more or less something I'm trying to figure out as well with this podcast is, and I mean, it's going to be a long time before I can even answer that question, but whether or not by having embracing your quarter life crisis a bit more, whether or not that could at least avoid a midlife crisis.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, because also everyone knows the midlife crisis, everyone has heard of it. Yet the quarter life crisis, from my experience at least, is not spoken about as much. And when I analyze the reason people have midlife crises, it's usually because they are very unhappy with their job. At that point realize, okay, I'm probably halfway, if not less, or if not more, through my life. I'm not happy with the position I'm in. And at that point, usually you have family, you have other responsibilities and stuff that come. And
all the stuff, you definitely have all the things that prevented me from being able to wriggle out from underneath the real estate stone.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder though whether the sort of the crises isn't being brought forward because we're not exactly the same age. Let's just pretend I'm going to take a little bit of your generation. But the generation who is going through a lot of quarter life crises, they're totally different. Their experience of life is completely different. Like, first of all, like let's say a baby boomer, they never thought that they might do 3 or 4 different jobs in their life. But this is completely normal now, of course, right? So the mindset, the worldview, the capacity, the potential, the idea that things could be different occurs to you way earlier nowadays than it did before. And I mean, maybe there's also a difference between one being a conscious crisis and the other one just being like, you are not in control of it. It's just everything is built up so long, and maybe it takes for people like 30 years for it to volcano out of them. Whereas if you really think about it consciously, 5 years or 7 years in the workforce is long enough to basically be like, hang on a second, this is not what I had wanted. So I don't know. For me, I wonder whether it's like it's the same crisis, but it's brought forward because of the significant contextual, cultural, and sort of generational differences between the groups of people. And then also the fact that one of them seems to be more conscious and the other one seems to be like, I don't know.
Which one in this case do you mean is conscious?
It seems like I'm just spitballing here, but it seems to me that a lot of people are told they're in a midlife crisis. It's sort of like, hey, dude, are you okay with that sports car and, this new haircut and you're dyeing your hair and all this sort of stuff? Like, are you all right? You're in a bit of a midlife crisis. Whereas I think I would, at least as I have a sort of, anecdotal experience, is that people who are having quarter life crises tell you that. They're like, man, I got to change my stuff up. I don't like it, So one seems deliberate and conscious and the other one seems to be a little bit, it's just happening and, and we're labeling it that way, perhaps. Whereas, the guy who divorces his wife gets a young girlfriend and a sports car, midlife crisis.
Right. So you managed to obviously you were on a certain path and you were like, okay, I'm not happy on this path. I'm going to sort of change it. Is there any advice there as far as if you're more at the crossroads, I guess I would say, where you see, okay, I could go this way, I could go this way, I could go this way. Do you have any advice as far as figuring out which path to take?
Okay, so I think I had the privilege of being broken out of prison. I didn't break myself out of that prison. So I don't have any advice for people who feel stuck, because I was, and for 5 years I couldn't do anything. Someone, the universe came in and broke me out of that prison.
Mhm.
So I lost everything, which is perfect.
Mhm.
So I can't advise someone
In
on how to create
hindsight,
that.
or did you think that right away?
It was pretty traumatic when it happened, but I'm pretty good at talking to myself internally, and I was just like, yeah, I'm not gonna like experience this frustration or emotion now because there's stuff to do.
Yeah.
I'm pretty good at basically saying, nope, now it's time
Burying
to
your emotions.
yeah, compartmentalizing.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Just like, nope, I don't want this to bog me down right now, so I'm going to adopt this mindset and I'm going to go and do this now. Anyway, so I think that's what happened, but for sure it was traumatic. It was definitely a very uncomfortable situation. I mean, basically what happened is that I found out that a relationship that I was in for many years, that the woman had cheated on me, and I found out on my wedding day. And then for an example of like the tension between controlling your sort of psychological response to that event and then not really being able to. Again, I don't know how sort of personal this podcast is meant to be, but the very first
personal
time,
as it gets.
Okay, the very first time that we tried to have sex after I'd found out about that, I literally couldn't. Like, we were starting, and then I just had all these images flash in my mind of this other guy and all that stuff. So I thought I dealt with it because I'm like, okay, let's try to get physical again. But then it was obviously impossible. So there was a difference obviously between then my sort of conscious consciousness, where I'm trying to direct how I feel, and then really what's happening underneath, and I couldn't control that. So it was traumatic, but I guess to answer the question or circle back to that, I didn't let that trauma stop what I was doing, because I was like, and I think, to be fair, if you have a relatively high self-belief or opinion of yourself, then saying that you deserve better than some trauma or something that happens to you is, I think, more easy. If you have a low opinion of yourself, then it's hard to sort of say, no, I'm going to do this thing now. And, taking the risk of sounding quite arrogant, I've always been pretty comfortable with myself and thought I was capable of things. And so if something doesn't go my way, I feel like it ought to. And then I'm like, okay, so how can I make it go my way? Because that's how my life should go. My life should go in a way where I get the things that I want. And so what do I need to do to make that happen? So I think that that sort of self-belief or confidence that you deserve or can have that life that you're imagining is also really important. So yeah.
Is there any way to build up that self-confidence?
So I don't know. I think it's like I don't know where people establish core beliefs, but core beliefs are really important. I mean, they are. It's kind of a truism, right? Core beliefs are fundamental. But maybe what's better to say is the content of those core beliefs is really important. So something that I've always believed is that this is not a dress rehearsal. This is not a practice run. Like,
yeah. You're not going to get to do it again.
You die, that's it.
Yeah.
And I think centering that understanding that this is your life, you are the principal actor in that theater, and you just gonna sound what a fuck. Let me just draw this analogy out longer, and you have to write the script. But like, really, you are the script writer, the director, and the actor in your own, theater of life. And I think on those dimensions, a lot of people don't believe that. They think someone else is writing the script, someone else is directing them. They're not center stage. They're a bit actor, or they're a supporting role character. I've never thought that. I've thought, no, can we swear on this podcast?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm like, no, fuck. I'm like, no, fuck that, man. This is my life. If I die, the world ends.
Yeah.
So through that equation, what I think is the most important thing. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. They can think what they want. If I'm dead, then they don't exist anymore. Neither do I. Neither does the universe.
Yeah.
So I think, in terms of, if you want to establish self-belief, I think people who really believe in themselves, I wonder whether that might not be a common thread, that they believe that they are the most important actor on this stage of life.
Do you think that that is something you have always been aware of, or has that come with the experience?
Honestly, if I had to just guess, my instinct is to say I was just born with that idea. I think I
Okay.
was just born thinking
Right.
that I was the most important human on the planet,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
if I'm gone, then there is no planet. I
Yeah.
think that idea, and also, I mean, to be fair, I think it's a pretty logical, like scientific secular concept, right?
I want to say yes, but I think you need to explain a bit more.
Well, what I mean is, it's like, if we don't believe, like if you're a complete scientific naturalist and you don't believe that there's anything spiritual to worry about, there's no,
Yeah.
like afterlife or anything, right? When you die, it goes black. If you believe that, which I don't happen to believe, but if you believe that, which lots of people do believe, then you definitely should believe that you're the most important subjective human, the one creating the world, because when your mind stops working, there's nothing going on.
Yeah.
So I think from that point of view, that should give you confidence that, everything you're seeing, everything you're experiencing is, in a way, your creation. You're in control of the world to the extent that the whole world is mediated through your brain.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway. So that's some real good. That'll get people real inspired and confident. Real easy to put that into practice.
Yeah. I mean, it's always easier said. I think that's one of the main things I've realized so far. It's always easier said, but there is a large amount of repetition, indeed, that I see between the different people I speak to. And one of the main things.
Can I ask you then?
Yeah.
Like for the people that you've spoken to, what is a common response to how to develop self-belief?
So I guess the YOLO phenomenon, to sort of put it in that is something which I feel like at least most of the people I've spoken to are very abundantly aware of, that they are indeed the main actor and they do have to, do what they want. Another one is that there's always an option C. And I spoke to one who phrased it like this nicely, but most say that in the sense that...
tell me what that means.
A lot of people think there's only a binary solution to one problem. And what he then said was there's always a third option. You just have to be creative enough to come up with it. And the analogy he gave me is, if there's a wall and I'm trying to get over this wall, people will either say A, okay, I can't, or B, I knock down the wall. And he's like, okay, C says, I build myself a ladder to climb over it. D is I make myself a cannon and shoot myself out of it to go over it. And that is something that I've started to realize that a lot of people come back to and say, there's always a way. You just have to figure out your way.
I mean, so that's definitely very interesting. I mean, I have often thought that one of the things that stops people trying to do things that they're nervous about is a lack of confidence that they can come up with a solution when the problem presents itself. And they think they need to know the solution in advance. And because they are uncertain about what problems will emerge, they can't figure out any solutions for problems they don't know about. And so then they are prevented from acting. Whereas I think someone who has experience of successes, and this is important, this is why you said before, is this something you learn? Yeah, you need to learn this. You need to learn that you can make it through things, which is why, when people say, it's not important, your successes, it's important your failures, but they never really tell you why that's the case. The reason is, then they might say, you learn more from your failures. But again, they don't explain really what that means. It's because through failing and succeeding and going through this process, you're developing an experience of your capacity and competencies, the range of what you're capable of, which then makes you much more likely to embrace some future challenge, because you're like, this is kind of like this other thing I did where I succeeded. Or I remember being in a situation where prior to engaging with it, I was nervous about it, but then when I engaged with it, it was actually fine, right? So I think in general, the more confident you are about your capacity to be able to resolve challenges dynamically and as they emerge, the more you'll just not care about.
I feel like from your example, though, it's you're even one stage further already, and something I realized myself recently is I don't even think people don't want to fail. I think they're afraid of potentially failing, which stops them from moving altogether. They don't do anything because they're scared to even get started because they might fail.
But I think the fear of failure has to have some conceptual connection with the idea of a potential result. You don't just fear, I think insofar as they're worried about not being able to do X. So the thing is that they haven't put themselves in a position in front of X to be able to know, as your friend said, that there's C, D, E, F opportunities. And as you say, the issue is with this binary thinking is they're like, you either just succeed at something or you can't do it. So the wall is either surmountable with, just scrambling, or it's too high.
Yeah.
And that's totally not, I mean, this is the other thing is, which I think, okay, I mean, this is definitely something that I've come to realize much later, is I've just stopped trying to think about the future. Fuck the future, man. You don't have no control over it. It's completely uncertain. Like, just, have a vague concept of something you want to do, but just put yourself, heart and soul into whatever is happening right now. That's all you can control. The rest of it's ridiculous. And I think a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to anticipate the future, like trying to place themselves into a state which doesn't exist, of which they have no knowledge about, insufficient information, and then try to figure out whether they can solve it. You're trying to solve some unknown situation which is completely riddled with uncertainty. It's just such a waste of time. So,
Julia said the reason why I tell you that is because usually as the last question I ask, what does the future hold for blah? Also because I'm curious what people respond to that. And Julia said the exact same, that she doesn't want to think about it too much because it's indeed uncertain.
Yeah.
And I am a firm believer that a lot of the times people think too long about or regret, right? The concept of regret doesn't really make any sense to me, because you never know what would have happened if you had taken the other route.
Yeah, I do.
So I fully agree with you there.
Yeah. I mean, this is going to sound very kind of like, new agey or whatever, but I just honestly don't believe that there is any significance whatsoever to past or future. I mean, and I've written about this. Yeah. I just think that because the past is dead time. It's no longer of any value. And even say memories of a past experience, the only ones that you want to hold on to are the ones that give you a sense of confidence. So it's like this. So have in your kit bag 5 memories of times when you impressed yourself and proved that you're, competent and capable of good stuff. Rest of the memories, just what's the point? So many memories people keep around in their heads are memories of them being crap, or memories of them failing something, or memories of them not living up to their own expectations already. Why would you keep those memories around? All they're doing is kind of like contributing to an unhelpful self-perception. So I think you can curate the memories you have. You're just like, no, can't get rid of that one. I just want to keep this. So, okay. So by and large, past is pretty pointless, except as a little reservoir, a little kit bag of some good memories to make you think highly of yourself. And then the future doesn't exist, and any imaginary form of it, you have no way of like controlling whether it comes to be in that sense. That's one thing. And then the other thing is, life is just so much more like relaxing and interesting if you just let it happen. Like, anyway, I mean, this is all just now we're really starting to sound like Deepak Chopra.
Well, again, it's funny because also there, Julia said the exact same. So you can definitely see that you two are married.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean,
can influence each other.
Yep, perfect. That's great.
Okay, so talk a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about your passion, and I know you like to talk about your PhD in particular. Try and summarize it in a way that everyone can understand.
So this is the what do they call that? The crib notes version.
Yeah. Give me an elevator pitch.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, I study 2 philosophers, or one of them is a philosopher and the other one is a quantum physicist / philosopher. And the philosopher that I study is an Englishman by the name of Thomas Hobbes. And Thomas Hobbes basically theorized and conceived of this idea called sovereignty, and gave sovereignty a real political meaning in terms of how to run, like, say, a country or a government. So Hobbes's basic argument says we need to have such a thing called a sovereign, and the sovereign basically makes the decisions for and on behalf of everyone in the state, so that we don't constantly bicker about what are good things, what are bad things, how should we do this, how should we do that. That's the real basic version of Hobbes. So he essentially conducts this thought experiment, and he's a 17th century English philosopher. So he does this thought experiment. He says, human beings disagree about everything. Like they disagree about the meaning of justice, what is a good life, what is all this stuff, right? And because they disagree about these in principle fundamentals, they then would try to build all different types of political systems, and it's all really contentious. And so human beings in a state of nature fight against each other. It's a war of all against all. It's just constant chaos, right? So he says, because that's the natural state, and if you have war and conflict, we can't have anything good. We can't have a society, we can't have commerce, we can't have invention and art and society and civilization. So the first thing you need to do is make everything calm and peaceful, and then we can have a nice society. So he says the sovereign does that for us, because the sovereign takes away all of our complicated decision making.
Yep.
So the sovereign can be a monarch, it can be a king or a queen, but it can equally be a democracy. We have a sovereign democracy. So the idea is that sovereignty is with you and I and people, and we go and vote, every so often, and then we get a government, and then the government makes decisions that we have empowered. Okay, so that's how sovereignty works. Now, Niels Bohr is a quantum physicist who agrees with Thomas Hobbes about his fundamental premise that everybody disagrees about reality and what the nature of things are, and that there's no real way to establish what's true and what's not. But he doesn't think that the solution to this disagreement, this indecision, is to have a decider. So he doesn't think that. He thinks, no, wait a second, we can actually get a way better understanding of what's going on around us if I preserve your opinion and your view, and mine's preserved, and all these different subject positions are preserved or kept in superposition, and you treat these disagreeing ideas about life not as competitive or contradictory, but as complementary ideas. And so Niels Bohr's big theory is complementarity.
Right.
So unfortunately for me, Niels Bohr made complementarity a physical theory. So he made it a theory for quantum physics to explain paradoxes that emerge in quantum experimentation. He said you can use it everywhere. You can use it in psychology and biology and all sorts of things, but he never told us how. So he gives us this really tantalizing, great promise of this awesome idea, but doesn't bother to tell you how to do it. In fact, in his copious writings, he never even gives complementarity a definition. You have to piece it together by reading like all these books. So what do? I basically try to make this thing called political complementarity, because I think that there's something in this. If Hobbes says the disagreement, we only resolve that with the sovereign, which basically just compresses all the possibilities of different options into this one decision, and another guy says, well, no, actually, you can have all this indecision, but you can keep them in superposition and you can come to greater understanding. I'm like, hell yeah, let's do that. Let's try that. Yep. So the PhD is trying to come up with a political version of complementarity, which I call political complementarity, and it's meant to be an alternative to sovereignty. So the big idea is maybe we can do away with sovereignty as this idea that there's just a big decider that collapses everything and determines everything in one way, and maybe we can live peaceably with complementarity, with a complementarity of different opinions rather than a competition of them.
Why this topic?
Because it reflects my inner convictions. I don't like sovereignty and I like complementarity. So it's like I've hated the notion of sovereignty as being a proposition that that there's one interpretation of life, that there's that just is crazy to me. And that I don't care how that's arrived at, whether it's democratically or whatever, there's no good way to make that possible. Like, why can I not live in a way that I feel is good for me and my kin and my community, and you the same? And maybe we're in the same jurisdiction. Why is that only possible that we somehow have to say, no, the best we can hope for is that there's a majority of people that want to live this way, and damn the rest of them? I don't know. It's just, I hate that idea. Yep. So that's where it begins. And then I basically just read a whole bunch of what you would call quantum philosophy, which is not, like all of the formalism and the math, but it's all the variety of ways that the findings of quantum physics was interpreted philosophically. So there's all these different things that it might mean. And, for example, there's like many worlds theory that every time you do a quantum experiment, the universe splits into all the different options, right? So there's like multiple different universes. There's all these different interpretations. And then I stumble across Bohr. And the fact that, as I said, what was the first passion? I said ideas. And Bohr is an epistemologist. His whole fascination is how human beings produce knowledge.
Yep.
And so that idea just really, I love the way he wrote, and I love what he was talking about. And I was like, this seems really... What's actually interesting is, I must admit, when I first was reading Bohr, I thought that he was, like, politically speaking, super, super naive. Like, to be fair, I thought he was a bit of a loser. Because I was like, because the things that he was suggesting... Okay, so check this. So towards the end of World War II, so Bohr, so Niels Bohr was in the early 20th century. So he got his Nobel Prize in 1922, I think. He's like super, super, super famous quantum physicist all the way through the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And he's helping with the Manhattan Project, the building of the atomic bomb.
Yeah.
And when that's coming close to completion and the war is still going on, so in 1944, he sends letters to Roosevelt and to Churchill and says, we need to share the sort of all of our technological information with the Russians, with the Soviets, right? Because he says, if we don't, they're just going to chase us to build it themselves.
Yeah.
So if we give them to them as well, right, then they have it, we have it, then we both have it. And what he's basically talking about is a early version of mutually assured destruction, the principle that nuclear weapons, if everyone happens, makes it safe. Okay. So anyway, but I'm reading this and I'm just like, seriously, you're sending a letter to Roosevelt a year out from the end of the war. Well, actually not Roosevelt, because he was dead. So that can't be that. It's not the right date.
Doesn't matter. I get the point.
Yeah. But so he sends a letter to Churchill and the president of America and asks them to share the secrets. And I'm like, dude, like, they have expended human and material capital to get an advantage. They're not going to now give the benefits of this scenario to someone else. Like, they want to remake this post-World War II world as they see fit. They're not wanting to share anything. So I guess the point is, I thought he was a little bit naive at first with his political prescriptions. But then as I've kind of gone further into my own investigation into what complementarity means, I see what he's talking about. I see what he's talking about. And in fact, if you read some of the things that I'm suggesting now, they seem equally naive, but they can work.
Yeah.
So that idea can work, and it does work. But we just don't think it does, because we're stuck in this Hobbesian mindset that people just compete, that people just fight one another. But that's a choice. It's not a necessity. It's not an inevitability.
What I find interesting about, especially the first part that you say, that you don't believe in the sovereign rule, I think was how you are, especially since recently, a religious man, though, right? Wouldn't you argue that the church is the ultimate form of sovereignty?
So I personally see a very sharp distinction between the institution of the church and then anything to do with God.
Right.
These are nothing to do with one another. One is a set of rules, how to control people, how to tell people how to live their life. Some good, some not so good. It's changing. It's not fixed. It's not real, so to speak. It's just a human creation. So I don't have any particular... I mean, my opinion on the church isn't in any way attached to my religiosity.
Right.
Like, so, I'm very happy to critique the church or say this is good or bad or whatever. It doesn't really bother me. But having said that, as a Catholic, I would show due deference and respect to bishops and to the Pope, because I'm meant to, right? So I understand that's my obligation. And as a good citizen and as a good member of this community, I would show proper respect. But it's not that I have some kind of firm conviction. I do it because I'm meant to. I do it because it's an obligation.
Right.
So, and so then I guess to continue on with the question, God is sovereign, but he's only sovereign over my soul. He's not sovereign over other people's souls, at least so far as I see it. People can do whatever the hell they want. Yeah. So he's, so God is, or, Jesus Christ is the person to whom I'm trying to, offer my good life and trying to imitate his, behavior and existence on this planet. But that's my journey. That has nothing to do with anybody else.
Yep.
And in fact, I think if anything, that demonstrates a complementarity in how I would like to see the world run. I think people who are extremely devoutly religious should be able to live and structure their daily existence around that, alongside people who want nothing to do with God and don't believe in God at all.
Yeah.
You know?
Fair.
And so, yeah, so I think the sovereignty that God holds is over my soul, nobody else's.
Yep.
I mean, maybe.
No, fair enough.
Whatever. Yeah.
You've obviously coming towards the end of your PhD writing slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations.
Thank
on
you.
that,
Yep.
You, however, also told me that it comes with quite a lot of friction, quite a lot of people not understanding the concepts that you're trying to lay out.
Yeah.
What's it like being the only one that sort of actually understands what you're trying to say?
Well, I mean, to be fair, at a certain point, you also have to take responsibility that maybe you're not explaining things very well, all that stuff. But let's just pretend that I've explained things as best I can. I think that experience is pretty common with a lot of people who are trying to write new stuff, new philosophy. And, not to compare myself to, great philosophers of the past, but a lot of people, when I've read about their own testimony about their experience, like a lot of philosophers, they only get recognized almost as they die or after death. I think
it's like artists almost.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's kind of part and parcel. If you're trying to do something new, I mean, the other thing I think also to appreciate. Okay, so let me say two things. It makes me angry all the time. It pisses me off for sure. I get really frustrated and it exhausts me, and I get angry about it, and then I just repeat the process. But if I step back from my own emotional reaction to it, I think it's something that you just have to accept. And also, to be fair on those that I blame for not understanding, they haven't dealt and sort of dwelt? Is that a word? Dwelt? They haven't dwelt in that information for the 3.5 years I have. So I understand it so well, but I've spent 3.5 years looking at it and reading it and going all around. And so,
have you ever thought about giving up?
No.
Where does that persistence come from?
I don't have a choice. I don't have a choice. I'm down this path now. I mean, that's, no. And I want to make it work. I believe it can work, and I just have to keep going. I mean, one thing that I definitely learned much later in life is the value of small steps, because I definitely used to be very intimidated by a large construction, thinking, how on earth would you ever build that thing? That's crazy. It's too big. I won't start. That was a real problem I had.
Yeah.
If it didn't look achievable in a sitting, I wouldn't even bother. But much later in life, and part of it was actually my confirmation process to become Catholic, is it seemed so long away. Like I went to mass and I couldn't take communion, and I'm like, oh, when am I going to be able to take communion? And then, after a year, you just go to the classes, and then step by step, and then before you know, you're like, oh my God, I'm confirmed, right? And so it's the same thing with the PhD. It's just small steps. It's just every day you just sit down, you just do a little bit, and you don't really worry about what the totality looks like. And then before you know it, you look behind you and like, holy mother, I can't believe I built that.
Compound effect.
Yeah, but I was terrible at that at a young age. If I didn't think I could eat it in one go, I wouldn't bother trying it.
So would you then also say that sort of transition only came from then going through your confirmation, or?
I don't know if it was just that. I think, well, I guess what's interesting is in the past, I wouldn't have even started it.
Yeah.
Right. So I think something must have changed before then to make me believe that it was even worth doing this sort of thing. Like, for example, I was the worst music student because practice, that's something, that just, I didn't, So, but now it's a little bit different mentality.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm just curious. Do you think the other stuff, such as music, maybe is a good example, do you think you ever maybe just didn't care enough about it? And that's why you lacked the...
I think I was just lazy. Honestly, I think I was ill-disciplined. I didn't have, or I didn't take on board as a really young person, like the idea that it's not like when you want to accomplish something meaningful, you don't have to derive pleasure from it the entire way through. That, and so I didn't learn that lesson. Let's just say this. I was never forced really to do anything I didn't want to do.
Yep.
And I know there are some parents that'll be like, nope, you have to spend 30 minutes of, violin practice. And although that might seem, awful, that instills in you a connection between the obligation to just dedicate a certain amount of time towards a greater project, and then having that thing, coalesce into something bigger, and then looking back and going, oh, okay, I get it now. And because I never did that, it was like, I remember I refused to sit down and learn to read with my father. He would try to teach me to read, and I'd be like, I don't want to do this, and I'd just leave. And no one would grab me and pull me back to the table and make me sit down. Yeah. So I was just, so I never really, it was too easy for me not to do those things.
Yeah.
So I never learned that aspect of it.
Fair enough. I think we're already getting towards the end. And as I already said, I'm still going to ask the last question because I'm curious for your responses. What does the future hold for Nick?
I have like a general sketch, like a hope. Like I'd like to see myself in a little corner office in a university somewhere, wearing a little tweed jacket with some like leather, leather patches.
Shoulder pads.
I have this. I'm probably getting on a little bit too old to even use this as my model now. But in Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones, the movie starts with him being the archaeology professor at the university, and like that seems really cool.
Yeah.
Not just because he has young female students batting their eyelids at him. That's not why. But anyway, you get what I mean. So like, I like that. That seems really appealing to me. And then, so I guess it's like, so when you say what does the future hold, I have like these hopes of like little sort of sketches or paintings of like nice images that I'd like little scenes I'd like to see myself in. Like one might be, talking about at a bookshop about a book I've just written, or, sitting in the office, or at at the tea room at the university talking about someone else's book, like things like that.
Yeah.
That's just that sort of stuff. So basically, I hope that's what the future holds.
Very
see what happens.
Content.
Yep. Nice and chill. Oh, and also I want to have a family.
Oh.
So I hope you...
It's also important.
Yes. I probably need to talk to Julia about that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I want to thank you so much for your time and your insight. Said so many valuable things, so I really appreciate it.
Cool, man. Thanks for the opportunity.
Of course.